preceding lesson, I used the word polymath. It's a word of Greek origin, but rather recent Greek origin. Polymaths, polymath. Well, one was first used around 1620 and polymathia from the 1640s. Both mean having learned much or many things. We also have a related term, Renaissance man. That's a 20th century expression invented by historians to denote the ideal person of the Western Renaissance. Someone, a man of course, who was enormously well-rounded. Again, knowledgeable in many fields, in many things. Historians sometimes identified Leon Battista Alberti, a Florentine philosopher and architect, as the first Renaissance man. But far more often, Leonardo da Vinci was so called. Today, overwhelmingly, Leonardo is considered the archetype of the Renaissance man. But the term Renaissance man remains problematic, being both gender biased and, I would argue, historically misleading. As I have been suggesting to students for decades, the first Renaissance man was really a medieval woman, indeed a Benedictine nun, Hildegard of Bingen. This is a modern representation of Hildegard, but it's not accurate. It's just a teaser. Here's a far more authentic image of Hildegard, painted around 1200, a few years after her death. Here we get closer to the way she really looked. Here's another image of Hildegard from the same period. And the next slide gives us the entire page from that same manuscript. Hildegard was a genius and a polymath. She was a preacher, poet, painter, politician, theologian, and musician, mystical visionary, student of biology, zoology, botany, and astronomy. Yes, Hildegard was all of these. She wrote 3 theological works, which collectively initiated the tradition of female mysticism, a branch of theology that hadn't previously existed. The manuscript on the screen is in Latin, in a beautifully clear script. It begins, Ecce quadragesimo tertio temporis cursus mei anno, cum celesti visioni magno. Behold, in the 43rd year of my life, with fear and trembling when I saw the greatest splendor of heaven, and so on. And next we see a representation from that manuscript of the type of mystical visions that she had. Now back to a previous page. More than any female of her day, Hildegard was a mover and shaker. She composed more examples of Gregorian chant than any person of the time, and wrote the West's first morality play, a liturgical drama. She also named plants and animals in the vernacular language. Our term lox, as in lox and bagels, for example, derives from Hildegard's word for salmon. Ultimately, because of these accomplishments and more, the powers of Rome canonized her as a saint and doctor of the church, Saint Hildegard. But note, this didn't happen until 2010. With Hildegard, once again, we see that our notion of who is a genius changes over time. When I first started studying Gregorian chant in graduate school in 1966, few had ever heard of Polymathic Hildegard. With the advent of women's studies in the late 20th century, she was rescued from oblivion. Today, if you do a Google search with the words Hildegard of Bingen, up pops more than 7 million hits. Wow, amazing. Amazing grace, Hildegard. Once was lost, but now is found, and securely lodged in public consciousness and in the pantheon of genius. Once again, we see the genius and a genius is whatever and whoever we wish to make it. Earlier in our discussion of the importance of curiosity to the genius, we met Leonardo da Vinci, the archetype of the Renaissance man. To get a sense of what curious Leonardo knew, let's revisit that job application he wrote at the age of 30 in 1482. Well, in that year, Leonardo had decided to leave Florence and move to another metropolis, as mentioned, the even larger city of Milan. Genius or not, he needed a job. So Leonardo wrote to the Sforza Palace in the center of Milan and to the reigning lord, the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. The top of the cover letter that Leonardo wrote is on the screen. Notice here that he is writing left to right, not in his usual right to left. For this job application to be effective, Duke Ludovico needed to be able to read Leonardo's letter. Next, as we see with the full page, Leonardo begins to enumerate all the services that he was able to provide for the Duke. 1, design light and strong bridges. 2, remove water from a moat to assist attackers of a fortress. 3, provide an unspecific method for destroying a fortress, even one built on a rock base. 4, build a new kind of cannonball. 5, silently make underground tunnels. 6, make unassailable armored chariots, sort of like Renaissance tanks, to send against armies. 7, construct a new type of cannon. 8, devise catapults and assaulting devices. Now we go back to the letter. Strangely, he skips the number 9. And 10, design any sort of public or private building, build any sort of canal. And then he adds at the end of 10, quote, I can execute sculpture in marble, bronze, and clay. Likewise in painting, I can do everything possible, end quote. It's only at the end of this, at the end of 10, that Leonardo mentions that he is, oh, by the way, also a painter. Ultimately, what was Leonardo hired to be? None of the above. He was hired to be, ostensibly, a court entertainer, someone who wrote, designed, and produced plays and pageants for the Sforza court. And he was hired to be a musician at court. Leonardo was also a skilled singer and performer on a stringed instrument called the lira da braccia, the kind of early violin of the sort that we see here on the screen, painted so beautifully by Raphael. Like Einstein, Leonardo was another wide-ranging scientific musician. Turning now to Benjamin Franklin, who also had an interest in science and music. Benjamin Franklin, too, became a polymath over time. Hedgehog first, then fox. When at the age of 17, Franklin moved from Boston to Philadelphia, then the largest city in the United States, he first became a printer's apprentice and then a master printer, becoming by 1745 the media mogul of the American colonies, his Poor Richard's Almanac being read almost everywhere. Gradually, as a public-spirited person, Franklin became involved in a variety of things in Philadelphia, establishing the first public library, as mentioned, the first in the United States. And then, in 1736, Philadelphia's Union Fire Department, and of course later he helped write both the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution, both signed in Philadelphia. And as an educator, he was the principal behind the founding of the, quote, Public Academy of Philadelphia, today known as the University of Pennsylvania. Let's return to the year 1749 and a document that you see on the screen, which contains some specific requirements for the curriculum, the courses of study that Ben Franklin thought necessary to his new university, what a young person should know. While Harvard and Yale aimed to graduate clergymen and mandated Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, Franklin thought in terms of the worldly businessman, requiring his students to be exposed to, quote, everything that is useful because art is long and the student's time in university, their time is short, end quote. Physics, engineering, and economics are front and center as subjects to be studied. And even accounting and farming get some attention. Modern languages, French, Spanish, and German, are required. but not the ancient classical languages. Although Franklin's curriculum was as wide-ranging as is a liberal arts education today, it was also practical, even entrepreneurial. Franklin is aiming for both wisdom as well as riches, as you can see by the emphasis on the screen. Polymath Ben Franklin saw no point in digging deep like a hedgehog just for the sake of depth. If a question had no practical ramification, then it was not worth pursuing. Although he explored diverse interests, physics, astronomy, botany, meteorology, oceanography, and politics, he ultimately arrived at insights with useful outcomes. Here are just a few things Franklin invented or conceived of, things that ultimately had a practical impact on the way people led their lives and thought about the world. If you want to know the ways in which Franklin had impact, why Franklin was and is considered a genius today, consider the list below. The Franklin stove yielded a more efficient means of home heating. Bifocals, why carry two pairs of glasses when one might do? Lightning is electricity and thus the lightning rod. Well, it protected a building and its occupants by channeling bolts of electricity around the structure. The glass harmonica. Both Mozart and Beethoven wrote music for this novel three-octave instrument that Franklin invented. The graduated property tax, assessment not per capita, but on the value of one's property. Swimming flippers, designed to generate more efficient natation. Yes, indeed, Franklin is in the Swimming Hall of Fame. The long arm, or grabber, designed as an aid to reach into high places. The medical catheter, the first urinary catheter used in America. Franklin Gothic type, a font style created by Franklin in 1726. Daylight saving time sets the clock earlier in the long days and saved candles and now electricity. The phonetic alphabet gives poor spellers a fighting chance with the English language. The nor'easter lets citizens know that these storms are actually coming from the southwest, not the northeast. The Gulf Stream accounts for the more rapid return voyage to England and the need to sail south when heading west, as well as the milder European winters. The public library, as we've seen, the first in America. Whew, an extraordinary range of interests. What about today? Who are the polymathic geniuses of today? Who is changing the world because he or she knows or has learned many things? As Kanye West said, I was never really good at anything except the ability to learn, end quote. Take a minute to think about it. Which polymathic genius, in your opinion, may be changing the world? We can each have our own choices, our own favorites, and it will depend to a degree on who we are and in what cultures we live and what experiences we have had. Think about it. Okay, let me be a bit perhaps provocative here. Did anyone name Lady Gaga? She generated the largest TV audience in the history of TV, 150 million viewers for the 2017 Super Bowl halftime show. In 2021, when Joe Biden was inaugurated as President of the United States, she sang the national anthem. She has won 9 Grammys. She was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress in 2019 and won the Academy Award that year for Best Original Song. Where's the impactful creativity? Well, she's obviously a creator. She's a composer, a choreographer, a cosmetic and fashion designer. Yes, the House of Gaga is her creation, and a humanitarian. I'm not one icon, I'm every icon, she proudly says. Let's switch to technology. Here one might name Jeff Bezos, the creative force behind Amazon, and of a space initiative called Blue Origin. Bezos extols the virtue of the wandering mind. Or one might choose Elon Musk, of course, his interests range from automobiles to solar electricity to efficient modes of underground transportation to outer space, etc., etc. Or one might choose Bill Gates for his interest in computers, and then more recently viruses and vaccines and global warming. In his recent book, Gates suggests that he starts every problem-solving exercise by setting a large framework. Quote, I try to get the big picture first because that gives me the context to understand new information, end quote. All three of these people are tech and commerce innovators, and they are polymaths. Although obsessively detail-oriented, they see the big picture, commerce around the world, saving the planet. And if that doesn't work out, the need to go into space to save humanity. What's the advantage of having the big picture of a polymath? Well, as Gates suggests, you see how things fit together. You see how things might combine in new creative ways, which carries us to our next segment, combinative thinking.